You're listening to God Stories Radio. God Stories Radio. God Stories Radio. Bringing hope and comfort through the Christian testimony.
Welcome to God Stories Radio, Session 16. I'm Fritz.
I'm Mike.
And we are here tonight with the Men of War.
Yes, we are. They're all here, even though John Durham is supposed to give his testimony.
John is going to give his testimony tonight.
He needed two to back up.
My ribs are hurting from laughing, and we'll have a podcast coming up in the future called Southies in the Bible.
Oh, my goodness.
I never laughed so hard in my life. But we're having a great time, and we're glad you joined us here on Session 16. And John, welcome to the program. Of course, we're delighted to have Ken and Joe with us back this week. Looking forward to Ken's testimony is out this week, Session 15, so make sure you give it a listen. Also, check out Men of War's new video on YouTube. What's that title, Joe?
Are We Ready?
Are We Ready?
And if you go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/Ministries of War, you'll find the video there.
Facebook.com/Ministries of War. You'll find the video there as well. So how's your
Good
week,
stuff. Mike? It was a little testy, but between you and some of the other brothers that God has brought in my circle with prayer and everything else, helped me get through a pretty bad day, actually.
Amen. Amen.
But it turned out to be a great night.
Yeah. I think we've all been tested. You know, we're taking ground. If we're not taking ground, we're not being tested. Something's wrong. We need to reevaluate.
That's right.
So, John, we're going to be quiet. Take it away, brother.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank both you and Mike once again for having me here tonight to share my story or my testimony. And I just, my deepest hope and my prayer tonight is that somebody out there would just hear this and just have hope. As you said earlier, you know, I'm here with Ken and Joe, and we've talked about before in one of the prior sessions the importance of having comrades in your life, guys that support you. And so we have a saying at War, we run in packs. And so I'm really excited about having them here with me tonight. I want to start off tonight by being, obviously I want to be transparent. I want to be real. I want to be honest. That's the most important thing. But I want to take a moment here to kind of talk a little bit about my parents, if I could, because before I get started, I think it's only fair to kind of start off with giving you a little bit of a background, their background. First and foremost, my number one thing is I don't ever want to bring any kind of disservice to my parents or dishonor to them. Some of the things I'm going to share with you tonight could actually do that if you didn't really understand where they've come from and where they've been. So I want to start with my dad. My dad's father served in the 101st Screaming Eagles. He actually was one of the guys that's back when they were a airborne unit, and he actually dropped on Normandy in World War II. While he was in the war, he was shot in the head, and he was found wandering around Europe for a period of time, and they actually sent him back to the States because he had some mental issues, and as shameful as it was for him, they actually got him for going AWOL. And that was not his intent. However, he wasn't really coherent with what he was doing, and when he got back, they kind of got him together. But as a result of that, it caused some trauma for him, and my father and his siblings spent some time in an orphanage until my grandfather remarried another woman. See, my dad's mom was a little promiscuous. She had several children from a couple of different men. And my grandfather and her they weren't compatible. They were more like fire and ice. So there was a period of time when my father and his brothers and sisters were put in an orphanage. They were later brought out of an orphanage, and my grandfather was one of these types that thought he was, going to find a great deal. So he decided he was going to go to a little town called Norton, Massachusetts, and he bought what he called the cellar home. It was actually the foundation of a house, and he just put a roof on the top of it. I remember as a small boy going over there before he passed away, and the toilet was sitting on cinder blocks. The house was very damp and musty. So my father grew up there, and for a long time, as a child, they didn't have any insulation in the house. So, as a matter of fact, my father put the insulation in when he was in his 20s. So they grew up pretty hard. There was 5 of them. They shared one bed, one sheet. My father owned 1 pair of pants, 1 pair of shoes, 1 pair of socks, 1 pair of underwear, and a T-shirt. He actually had an issue with wetting the bed, and he wore a diaper to school till he was about 9 years old. So he had some emotional trauma growing up. My mother, on the other hand, she grew up in a home where her father was a carpenter. Her mother was very free with expressing herself. My father would tell me stories of her waving to my mom on the school bus, naked, standing in the doorway. I remember as a child growing up, it was not uncommon for my grandmother to walk around with her shirt off. And then she would ask you what you were looking at. She had a favorite T-shirt, and on that T-shirt there was a hole where her nipple protruded through it. My mother grew up in a very, very harsh environment. But when she met my father was actually, he's engaged to another girl. He got cold feet, hooked up with my mom, and got her pregnant. My parents were married at the age of 19 and 17. My mother was pregnant with my brother Barry. They moved into a small home on the east side of town in a town called Attleboro, where later, a couple of years later, they had me. And then they also had my brother Tommy. They had a very estranged marriage. They had a lot of stress and a lot of baggage that they brought into their relationship, as you could probably tell from their past. So my father, instead of manning up and grabbing by the home by the reins and breaking the chains, he did what a lot of men did. He found comfort in the arms of another woman. My mother was a type that she wasn't a very good housekeeper. She wasn't very good at being, a stay-at-home mom type. My dad told me it was very rare for my mother to cook a meal or for them to kind of spend any intimate time together. In the process of that, my mother and my father had a child. His name was Tommy, my brother. He was born in September, and by January, he had died in his crib. My mother, to this day, will tell you that he died a crib death, but the reality of it is that he died by choking on his vomit, in his own vomit in his sleep. My mother had been up all night with her sister and I believe one of her cousins. You know this, Mike, up in the Northeast, they like to smoke cigarettes and drink coffee. And that's just what they do. They sit around and smoke cigarettes and drink coffee. My father, at the time, was down at the local grocery store meeting with his girlfriend, supposedly breaking it off. My mother was in bed sleeping, and my older brother Barry, who was 5 at the time, was the one that found my brother deceased in his crib. And I wasn't too far behind him. I think I was 3 at the time. So needless to say, things didn't start off on the best of foot. Matter of fact, what's amazing is I meet a lot of people, and they assume when they first meet me that I grew up in a suburban home with 2 parents, the 2-car garage, the white picket fence, the dog, and the whole 9 yards. But the reality of it is it wasn't too long after my father and my mother split, and my mother was raising my brother and I in a small apartment on welfare. And so the apartment was roach infested. We had a number of times where, electricity was an issue. My mother was a single parent trying to raise 2 children. Heartbroken from the situation with my father, the loss of a child, trying to raise 2 more. And my dad actually, after he left my mom, stayed with his girlfriend. The sad part about it was my father was visiting my mother while he was dating this other woman and got her pregnant with my brother Bobby. The phone just keeps going on and on and on. My father and my mom seemed like every time they hooked up, they had children. And so it's kind of an ongoing joke in the family. But the sad reality of it is now she's raising 3 small boys. She's in a small apartment, raising them on welfare, going through massive states of depression, just regret and guilt. As you can imagine, when you're in a home and you lose a child and neither one of you are perfect, there's a lot of blame to go around, And so my mother lived under that for a long time. And because of that, she was really checked out for a long time. And I can remember kind of moving a little forward here because I don't want to just dwell on one spot, but I can remember through periods of my childhood where, most children, they can sit back and tell you about intimate moments with their parents. They can tell you about vacations. They can tell you about fun things they've done together. And for me, that part of my life is really a fog. Being the middle child caused some major issues for me. I have my brother Barry, who was extremely damaged through this. My father, in all of his infamous wisdom, he was getting ready to leave to go move to Washington State with his new wife. So he decided to go to my brother's school and tell him he was leaving. That created some emotional trauma with him, which ended up developing into a learning disability and some emotional issues with that. My mother's still suffering with the loss of one child. My younger brother Bobby now is the baby boy, so her focus is on him. So not that I pity myself by any means, but life is what it is, and reality is what reality is. And so I've always kind of been a survivor, so to speak. My parents always say that. Well, you always were the tougher one. You were always a survivor, But in the midst of that, I lost periods of my life, especially as a child. I don't have a lot of fond memories of spending intimate time with either one of my parents, to be completely honest with you. I remember as a young boy wanting desperately to have a relationship with my father, but he had moved to Washington. We were living in Massachusetts. You couldn't get to two further places in the United States. I mean, he was starting a new family, and I guess in his mind, he'd already failed his first one, and he is starting a second one. He'd already had another child. My brother Derek was brought in the mix, and not too long after that, I had another brother, Sean. My father, by the way, had 7 sons.
Wow.
3 different women.
Okay.
It was my oldest brother, Barry, then it was me, Tommy, Bobby, Derek, Sean, and Frankie. So those are my brothers from my parents. My mother had 6 children. She had me, Barry, Bobby, Tommy, Dala, and my brother Chris. So we have a very large family, My father's wife now has 2 children of her own, so there was 2 more, Nicole and Jimmy, that were added to the mix. His second marriage, she had 4 other children, so there was a lot of... You want to talk about intermingling, you want to talk about mixed families, there was a lot of that going on. And because of that, there was a lot of displacement for myself. For a long period of time in my life, I just never felt like I really fit. I didn't feel like I fit with my mom. I didn't feel like I really fit with my dad. And I was about 8 years old, and I decided that I wanted to go live with my father. So my mother and he had talked about it and decided that I would go live with him in Washington State with his second wife, and spent my 4th grade year living with my dad, and it was probably one of the worst years of my life as a child. His wife was very vindictive, very jealous, very verbally, emotionally, and at times physically abusive. I can remember just situations like sending me outside to pick up dog feces with my hands, putting me in the yard to pick weeds out of the grass until my father got home from work. And then when he would pull up, right before he'd pull up, she'd send me off and tell him I was playing all day. Just twisted, manipulative games where she was trying to somehow, I guess, stick it to my dad by sticking it to me. She wasn't happy about the fact that he had brought me into their home, So one of my saddest memories was being 8 years old, telling my father, a grown man, that I needed to go for a walk and have a talk with him. And walking him around a cul-de-sac and looking him in the eye and telling him that I love you, but I can't live with you anymore. And it was the first time I ever saw my father cry. Quite honestly, at that point it really didn't matter. Because even at 8, I felt like my father should have stepped up and done something.
Well, I'm thinking that it should have been reversed, shouldn't he have been having a talk with you?
Well, looking back on
this,
this,
8-year-old
yeah.
taking dad out.
Looking back on it as an adult and as a father today, I'm with you, Mike. Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's times in my life because of that I've harbored resentment or